Hey guys, Greg Alexander. Stay tuned today to help understand the different reel ratios and which ones you can use in which situations. So let's get right into it. I'm talking about today bait casting reels, something like this. Now bait casting reels come in different sizes, different line, how much line they'll hold. Some have bigger spools, some have smaller spools. And all that needs to be taken into account when you're trying to figure out what speed reel that you want to use. So the speed of reel is basically a gear ratio, is how many times or how many inches of line it takes up with each turn of the handle, from 15 to 35, 40 inches sometimes. With that, we have to understand that the higher the gear ratio, 8.1 to 1, even 10 to 1 versus a 4 to 1, the higher the gear ratio, the lower your power, the ability to turn it, versus the lower the gear ratio, the higher your actual power, like a bulldozer basically. So basically, there's 4 or 5 common ratio reels to consider. And in each ratio, there's maybe a couple points difference depending on the reel. You have 4.8 to 1, 5.3 to 1. Some of them reels will have 4.6 and 5.1. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 even in your gear ratio. So which one do you select? Well, if you're throwing something that requires a lot of power, say, 6XD, or a big heavy spinnerbait, or a big heavy swim bait, something like that you're going to be cranking and winding all day long, something that has a lot of resistance in the water, you're going to generally want to lower your gear ratio, 4.8, 5.3 to 1. That'll keep you from tiring out, and it'll also keep you from overworking these baits. And so one thing that I did a couple years ago is I got on the bandwagon with everybody else when they were talking about high speed reels, and I went out and bought a couple of 8 something to 1 gear ratio reels, and I started fishing, a spinnerbait and a chatterbait on some of these reels, and I found that, I wasn't getting as many bites as I used to get before. And the reason I wasn't getting as many bites as I was getting before is because, I'm turning the handle the same speed that I used to turn in the past. But now it's coming back to me a lot faster. So what's that doing? It's getting it up off the bottom, away from the cover, maybe move it a little bit too quick in some dingier water. So I've recently gone back with some of those particular lures, those winding type lures, to a slower gear ratio. Plus, it'll, less likely to tire you out too. So, big crankbaits, things that draw a lot of water, you're talking about 4.8 to 5.3 to 1 gear ratio. Now, back in the day, not even too long ago, the fastest reel you could get was like 6.8 to 1, 6.3 to 1. But now that's kind of like, a medium, very medium speed reel. But I believe the 6.3, 6.8 to 1, like I just said, is probably your best gear ratio for working a spinnerbait or a vibrating jig or a swim jig. I think you get going too fast with some of the other stuff. So when would you use a 7.1 or 7.3 to 1 or an 8.3 to 1 lure or reel versus some of these others? Well, that's, if you're flipping and pitching and pretty much your close distance, 7, 8, even 10 to 1, increases the amount of time not lost fishing, because you get done flipping or pitching You can reel in real quick and make another pitch. You know, you're saving 1 or 2 seconds here, 1 or 2 seconds there, times 400 flips a day. You know, you're 800 seconds, and that could be 2 fish by the end of the day. It just increases your efficiency. And really, when you're flipping and pitching, you don't need that power that you need, you know, with these resistant type baits or long distance type cast, because you're doing it with your rod. You know, it's right there, 15, 20, 30 feet away. You're getting the fish up and out, and then it's 2 or 3 or 4 cranks, and he's at the boat, and then you work him, and then you either net him or lip him or flip him in, or whatever you do. So, you know, the higher speed reels are good for that. Sometimes the higher speed reels, if you're throwing like a topwater bait, and you're pretty much, you know, you're working it like a fluke or a Zara spook or a popper, you're pretty much working it the speed with your rod and then just taking up the slack with your reel. But the strike zone is small. You know, you're throwing up towards something, you know, a bush, a point, a rock pile, and you're staying off of it. And you don't want to spend all day reeling in between casts to make another cast. So you want a high speed reel to, again, lose that inefficient time with your lure in the water. So now with the Baitcaster, you have different size spools, and that will affect it. This is a old Shimano Castaic. It has a big spool, holds a lot of line. That bigger spool, if this is 6.3 to 1, and this smaller reel, this Sitka, is 6.3 to 1 with a smaller spool, and both of the reels are full of line, then this is going to take up more line than this one. Simple math. You got a bigger circumference, and you turn the handle on the same gear ratio, it's going to pull in more line quicker. So just because one reel says 6.3 and another says 6.3, it doesn't mean that they're going to have the same exact speed. Now also understand too, if you let your line get down in your spool where it's not full, again, your gear ratio is going to remain the same, but your line uptake is going to be less, so it'll come in slower. And then when you select a reel based on speed and power, like we've talked about, they also have a left-handed version. This is left-handed version. You reel with your left hand, hold it with your right. And then there's a right-hand version, which I don't have here, but you would reel that with your right hand and hold that with your left. And I believe, you know, all bass fishermen need to learn how to reel with both hands. Maybe you'll cast all the time with your right hand or your left hand. It's best if you can learn to cast both ways too, because there'll be situations where you really need to throw left, and there'll be situations where you really need to throw right. But years ago, I went to all left-handed retrieves. And the reason I'm a right-handed person, the reason I did that is I really found it just too much waste of time to cast with my right hand, flip the rod into my left hand to hold it, and then hold it with my right hand. I just thought that this didn't make any sense to me. So I went to all left-handed retrieves. And that's good, very efficient. But I'll tell you what it does do. If you're casting and winding all day long, and you throw with your right hand, and you hold the rod with your right hand, and you reel with your left, for example, by the end of the day, your right hand is toast because it gets no break, whereas you've cast with your right hand and hold it with your left. See, power there, reeling is really nothing. So what I've done recently is for like crankbaiting, I've gone back to a couple reels that are right hand retrieve, just because at my age, I need the break on my hand, where I used to hold everything in my right cast and hold in my right hand. Now I cast when I'm crankbaiting, I cast with my right hand, I change to my left, and then I reel with my right again. So that just gives me a little bit of a break. Flipping and pitching, I still cast right and reel left. Throwing a frog or something, I still cast right, reel left. And the reason I do that again is, man, if you skip a frog up under a tree and they're active, you can't change hands fast enough before he's got it. So sometimes you need to be ready. You know, if you're flipping into a bush and they're real active, you know, sometimes he's got it and you're fumbling with changing hands and the fish is going off with it, and if you've kept it in your right hand the whole time, you're already ready. So these are just some other things I'm talking about. So just remember, if you want a good all-around bait casting reel, I would stick with a 6.8, 6.3 to 1 gear ratio reel. It'll cover all the bases. It covered all the bases for years and years before they came out with these high-speed reels, and it'll do the job for you. So again, if you like my videos and you want to follow them on a regular basis, please hit the subscribe button and the little like and the little bell thing. It'll help you. It'll help me, and have a blessed day.